All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at Karl Marx, specifically one of his most important works, but we're going to view it through a really unusual lens. It's a framework that claims there's a secret hidden in his writing that's been missed for over a century and a half.
So it all kicks off with this pretty radical question. What if the famous 11 theses on Feuerbach, the absolute bedrock of so much revolutionary thought, was actually missing something, like a final, crucial piece of the whole puzzle?
The theory we're exploring today is pretty wild. It suggests that Marx's argument has this hidden, logical structure that builds and builds, but then just stops right before the final step. And the key to seeing this missing step? Well, according to this theory, it's written in the stars. Yeah, you heard me right, the zodiac. To really get what's going on here, we have to understand the main idea of this framework. It calls it the dialectical zodiac, and it's basically a map for lining up Marx's philosophical logic with this ancient symbolic system.
Okay, first, a real quick refresher. The theses on Feuerbach is basically Marx's notepad of sharp critiques against philosophers who just sit around thinking about the world without actually doing anything. This is where he's really building the foundation for his huge idea of praxis, which is just the fusion of theory and real world-changing action.
So here's the core of it. You take each of the 11 theses and you assign them to a zodiac sign in order, starting with Aries and going all the way to Aquarius. And when you do that, a surprisingly clear logical pattern starts to show up. But it also reveals this massive, glaring hole right at the very end.
So let's trace this journey. The first 7 theses, according to this idea, are all about building the foundation. They start with the raw idea of action and then expand it out into the social world.
Now, check out how perfectly this lines up. It all begins with Thesis 1, mapped to Aries, the ram, right? Pure initiation, the spark of action. Marx says human activity isn't just a thought, it's a real force that changes things. Then, Thesis 2 lines up with Taurus, the bull, the sign of everything tangible and material. This is Marx saying truth isn't some abstract idea, you have to prove it in the real world. And then comes Thesis 3 with Gemini, the twins, the sign of duality. It's a perfect fit for his idea that changing the world and changing yourself are actually the exact same process.
And believe it or not, the pattern just keeps going. Thesis 4 gets paired with Cancer, the sign of home and family. Here Marx says it's not enough to just critique religion, you have to revolutionize the family structure that creates it. Then we get Leo, the lion, the hero. Thesis 5 reframes our senses not as something passive, but as a form of active, heroic engagement with the world. Next is Virgo, the detail-oriented analyst, who takes apart the abstract idea of human essence and says, no, it's actually the sum of our social relationships. And this part of the argument wraps up with Libra, the scales of society, which says an individual is never just an abstract idea. They are always part of a specific society. See the flow? It's pretty amazing.
Okay, now we're getting to the part where the argument really starts to accelerate towards that famous conclusion. But according to this theory, this is also exactly where a critical gap starts to open up. The argument gets even deeper. Thesis 8 lines up with Scorpio, the sign all about uncovering hidden truths. Marx says that practice, actually doing things, is what solves the mysteries that make pure theory just spin its wheels. Then comes Thesis 9, linked to Sagittarius, the archer aiming high. This represents the peak of the old way of thinking. It can see the goal, but it has no power to actually get there. And that leads to Thesis 10, Capricorn, the builder. This is the big shift, from just analyzing the old society to actually drawing up blueprints for a new one. And this whole chain reaction builds up to his final, absolutely explosive point.
And there it is, Thesis 11. This one is aligned with Aquarius, the sign of revolution and big, world-changing ideas. This is Marx's legendary mic drop. He's basically saying, all right, thousands of years of philosophy, you had your shot. You were all busy interpreting. We're done with that. The point is to change it.
But, and this is the absolute core insight of this whole Astro-Marxist idea. When Marx makes that statement, he's making a massive leap. He's jumping from Aquarius, the last word on intellectual systems, all the way back to the beginning, back to Aries, the first sign of raw action. He completely bypasses something. And that, of course, is the million-dollar question. What's in that gap? If the zodiac is a complete circle, a complete process, what is that final step that Marx just jumps right over? What's the missing piece? So, let's finally get to the big reveal. This is what the source material we're looking at proposes as the missing piece of the puzzle, the key that completes the entire revolutionary circle. The missing sign is Pisces. And according to this theory, Pisces,
the sign of what's hidden, of dreams, of the unconscious, represents the very thing that Marx tried to leap over. It represents interpretation itself. It's the ultimate blind spot. The argument is, you can't just throw away interpretation and jump to action, because every action you take is already shaped by your hidden interpretations.
And this leads us to what the source calls the reconstructed 12th thesis. The big idea here is that a real, lasting revolution has to do two things at once. It has to transform the material world, and it has to transform the way we understand and interpret that world. It has to be aware of its own blind spots, its own ideology.
And the implications of this are, well, they're huge. It means that action without this kind of self-aware interpretation just becomes a kind of blind, dogmatic force. But on the flip side, interpretation without action just leads to you being stuck, to paralysis. So the point is that you need both. You have to change the world while constantly changing how you see the world, admitting that even revolutionaries can have their own unconscious biases.
And, get this, here's a fascinating piece of context. Marx was only 27 years old when he jotted these theses down. The source we're looking at speculates that maybe he could feel this problem, this internal interpretive dimension of revolution, but he just didn't have the tools to talk about it yet. I mean, the language of psychoanalysis, of the unconscious, it just wasn't invented. So maybe the 12th thesis was literally unwritable back in 1845.
So, to bring it all home, the crucial point of this whole framework is that Marx's amazing call to action is kind of incomplete if it's not paired with an equally powerful call to self-awareness. Real change isn't just about breaking the old system. It's about understanding and transforming the very ideas that hold that system together, especially the ones that are lodged inside our own heads.
And that really just leaves us with one final, pretty mind-bending question to chew on. If changing the world and changing ourselves are really the same thing, then maybe the most revolutionary act of all isn't just changing what's out there, but changing the very lens through which we see everything.